This week we're pulling out blade number 3 of the Swiss Army knife of cast-on techniques, the crochet cast-on. We'll be doing a provisional cast-on with built-in Lifeline. As always, if you want to jump directly to a specific point in the video, there are links down in the description. A provisional cast-on is a temporary cast-on that allows you to return to your starting point later in the project. You recapture that first row of stitches, remove the temporary cast-on edge, and you can then use those live stitches to do whatever you want. You may want to graft them to another set of live stitches, or you might want to simply bind them off in order to match the bind off at the other edge of the fabric. Or you may want to actually knit them for some number of inches or feet in the opposite direction. Now, there are a lot of ways of creating a provisional cast-on, and each has advantages and disadvantages. I happen to think that this particular method has way more advantages than any other provisional cast-on method I have used. Now, because the focus of this video is adapting the crochet cast-on to use it for this purpose, I assume that you already are familiar with the crochet cast-on. And if you are not, I recommend that you click on the link to the very first video in this series and get yourself acclimated to that crochet cast-on. And then we can get started. The materials you're going to need are your project needles, a crochet hook about the same size as your project needles, and then you need your project yarn. If you're using, say, something smooth and medium to light in color, you don't need to use waste yarn for this cast on. But if you're using something really dark like this, or something very fuzzy, or that has a lot of texture, or is just kind of a little difficult to work with, you would do well to have some waste yarn to do the provisional cast on, and then switch to your main yarn when you're actually going to knit. If you do not use waste yarn, you need a locking stitch marker. I'm using the project yarn here to create my cast on, so I give myself some yarn tail, create my slip knot, I need 20 stitches, so I'm going to cast on half that number, which is 10. If I needed 21 stitches, I would round up to the next even number, which is 22, and I would cast on half that number, which would be 11. And now I'm going to, with the remaining yarn tail here, I'm going to just crochet a few chain stitches. And then I enlarge that final loop and leave that dangling. Now I'm going to slide the stitches to the other end of the needle. Because I'm using my project yarn for the cast on, I'm going to attach a locking marker right here. To double the stitches, I will alternate a yarn over with a knit one. So I will be starting with a yarn over. If I have an odd number of cast on stitches, I will start with a knit one, and then I will alternate yarn over with knit one. If you hold the yarn in your right hand, tension the yarn, pick up the needle, you're holding the needle in front of the yarn, and just bring the needle under it in order to create that yarn over, and then you enter your stitch. You have your yarn over and you can create your stitch. If you hold the yarn in your left hand, bring your working needle under the yarn so that it's laying on the needle, put your finger on it to anchor it, and now you can enter the first stitch. You will end with a knit one regardless of whether you need an even number or an odd number. I have 20, so I'm good to go. So my cast on is complete, and now I can work the first row of my project. After you've worked a few rounds or a few rows, you can release the crochet provisional cast on and create your lifeline. So if you're using the project yarn for the provisional cast on, the reason for this locking marker is for you to hold on to it while you release the lifeline. And you can kind of pull at this end further. Now this loop is fine. Ultimately, we're going to be pulling the lifeline out using this marker as well. But at this point, you can see you have stitches sitting on this strand of yarn. And you have exactly the number of stitches that you will need. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 19, and there's 20 down here. So I have all 20 stitches waiting for me on my lifeline. Now you can use your project needles to recapture stitches. I find it a little easier to use a smaller needle and then knit off of the smaller needle for the first row. So because I'm using a light colored yarn, it's fairly easy to see the path of this running thread, and I just follow that all along, recapturing each stitch one at a time, knowing that my running thread is still there. If I mess up somehow, I can pull the needle out and start over again. So now I have all of them on. I can confirm by counting 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. I have all 20. I have my little handle here, and I can use it to help me get started if I need to, or I just pull. So now I'm just pulling the lifeline and now it's out. So now all I have on the needle are stitches. So now I can start knitting my stitches. This first one is fine for knitting, but the second one is sitting on the needle so that the leading leg, the leg closest to the tip, is the one is hanging over the back of the needle. So you can handle this in one of two ways. You can enter the stitch so that you are pushing against that leading leg, that back leg, rather than coming through the front, which would twist it. So you're pushing against that leading leg in order to knit it. The next stitch is sitting correctly on the needle, so I can knit it just like that. The alternative is to remount the stitch so that it's sitting in the way that you're expecting it. So you'd have to remount it and then you could knit it. I find it easier to recognize that that stitch is mounted differently and then entering it so that I'm pushing against that leading leg. When you knit a normal stitch and you're coming through the front, you are also pushing against that leading leg. So as long as you're always pushing against that leading leg while you're knitting it or purling it, then you don't have to remount them. So now I'm all set. So I have the right number of stitches, but because I am knitting in the opposite direction, there is going to be an offset by half a stitch. So the edge, there will be a little jog in each edge. Not every knitter is going to agree on what the best technique is to use in a specific situation because every knitter has different preferences and a different skill set. For me, the advantages of the provisional cast on demonstrated in this video are numerous. First, I have a choice about whether to use waste yarn or not. Second, it's based on a technique familiar to me, the crochet cast on. Third, the modification to the cast on is the same as the modification used for the pinhole cast on I demonstrated last week and the tubular cast on that I'll be demonstrating next week. Having this repetition of the same technique used in multiple situations really helps to lock it into my brain. Fourth, I can recapture the stitches before I remove the temporary cast on. 5, the temporary cast on is extremely easy to remove. It just requires a single tug and it's gone. And finally, the number of stitches that are on the needle after I remove my temporary cast on is exactly the same as my original cast on number when I started the project in the other direction. All of these advantages combine to totally outweigh the one small disadvantage of this technique, which is that the recaptured live stitches alternate how they're mounted on the needle, and you have to knit them or purl them accordingly. If you have any questions or comments about this video, or have any suggestions for videos you'd like to see me make in the future, please leave them down in the comments below. Or you can join the discussion over on my Ravelry group, Rocks, and there's a link to that down in the description. You can see a playlist of all my Swiss Army knife videos right up here. The last video will be uploaded a week from today, and it will be covering the tubular cast on. If you'd like to see a playlist of all my past cast on videos of every type, that's down below there. And if you'd like to subscribe to my channel, which I'd really like, you can click on the subscribe button next to my face.